más de 3 décadas de experiencia en finanzas públicas, nuestro invitado es uno de los economistas más citados a nivel mundial. Ha asesorado a gobiernos y organismos internacionales en la gestión fiscal y ha ocupado cargos de alta relevancia, incluyendo ministro de Finanzas y viceprimer ministro de Bulgaria entre 2009 y 2013. También fue presidente del Consejo del Banco Europeo para la Reconstrucción y el Desarrollo. Con ustedes, Simeon Djankov.
Hello, Puebla. Hello, Festival of Ideas. A round of applause for the festival and its organizers. Tomorrow, Sunday, all Mexicans, all of you, will have an opportunity to participate in a fascinating political experiment, the direct election of judges. I'm here to tell you why this is a bad idea to have such elections of judges, and why you should worry about it. Let me start by saying, thank you. Let me start by saying that there is only one other country in the world, Bolivia, that has decided to have direct election of judges by popular vote. Only one country, Bolivia. So we have some 15 years of experience in the Bolivian case. 3 elections of judges have happened, and they have all been a failure. The then president, Evo Morales, who changed the constitution in 2009 to create this new feature in the judiciary, direct elections, did it for a simple purpose. He wanted to be voted in for a 4th term as president, and the constitution did not allow that in Bolivia. So he decided, why don't I change the constitution, have direct election of judges, and since these are my people, they will elect, guess who? Me. So that's how Bolivia came to this idea. What happened? Evo Morales was in fact elected for a consecutive 4th term. So far, so good. Except that there was mass demonstrations that started, revolts, so he had to flee the country. His deputy became interim president only for a few months. She was put in jail for 10 years, is still in jail, by these same judges who quickly changed their political inclination and basically went with the opposition at the time. And the current president, who did not change the system, thought that it would work to his advantage to be able to control the judges. Just a few weeks ago, again with popular revolts, announced that he's not going to seek re-election. He's going to leave politics altogether. So in other words, if you look at the Bolivian experience, the people who put this change to the constitution, actually they themselves thought it was a good idea, but lost. They're no longer in politics. Not only that, but Bolivia in the various global indices of judicial quality, of access to the judiciary, of efficiency of courts, went from about 130th in the world, not a great place to be originally, to the last but one country in the world. So the very last 2 spots now became Bolivia's place. So nobody really liked the reform there. So if that's the case, and if this is the only country in the world that implemented this system before Mexico did, the natural question is, why is Mexico doing this? Why are you going through this political experiment that starts tomorrow? So there are 2 options. The first option is that the former president who started this, AMLO as you call him, thought that this was a genuinely good idea. And even though no other country in the world does it, other than Bolivia, you in Mexico have discovered something that no other country has discovered. And as a result, your society is going to be better with this with this reform. The problem with this, let's say, hypothesis is twofold. First, I told you the story of Bolivia. The reforms there have been judged a failure. And also, no other developed country has ever thought of this. Not Switzerland, not Finland, not Canada, not Australia, which are all the countries at the very top of the various rankings of court efficiency in the world. So then why Mexico? Time will tell. I don't have the answer to that. But there is a second hypothesis to this story, which is consistent with the Bolivian example, which is that this is done not to improve court performance, but this is done for purely political means, to control, for the executive, to control all other parts of government. So let me tell you a personal story. As you heard a minute ago, I come from Eastern Europe, originally from Bulgaria. Our region for half a century, for 50 years, was under communism, which is probably the extreme form of absence of democracy, of dictatorship. And I was leaving, as I was finishing high school, I managed to escape the country. So I went to study in Germany, then the United States. And as a young economist, I joined the World Bank. So in the World Bank, I was immediately sent back to my region, to Eastern Europe, to develop market economies, to help new politicians develop market economies. So one of my first assignments was in Hungary. Hungary is a country in Central Europe. There, I was on a team that was helping a young politician, former student leader, who was very democratic by the judgment of the World Bank in the United States, who wanted a market economy. His name is Viktor Orban. He's the current prime minister of the country. And soon after we started work together in 1998, he became prime minister for the first time, a very young prime minister. And for 4 years, Hungary was the best example, global, not just in Central Europe, of how to develop a market economy. In 3 years, a year before his first term expired, Hungary had become the #1 country in the world in terms of foreign direct investment per capita, per population. Lots of foreign direct investment because people thought this is the country to invest. They have good institutions. They're developing a good market economy. Comes 2002, the next elections, and surprising to many, Viktor Orban loses to the socialists, the ex-communist party. I met him briefly after that. We had become friends since we worked together, and he said, the elections were rigged. I'm going to make sure that I come to power again as prime minister, and I'm never, ever going to relinquish power. I'm going to be running the country forever. So I thought, people say that when they lose elections, so good for you, Viktor. So didn't think much of it. Except a few years later, it turned out that the socialists, the party that succeeded him, did rig the elections. So they had a sort of a retreat, not quite large as we are, but among the party leaders, they drank a bit more wine than necessary, and they started telling each other how they rigged the elections, how they bribed the election officials in order to win. Somebody had taped this conversation. It came out publicly. So lo and behold, Viktor Orban comes back to power in 2010. And I remember meeting him again at that time, and he said, watch me. I'm going to institute this idea, which is called illiberal democracy. So not liberal democracy like Roberto spoke before me, but illiberal democracy. What is illiberal democracy? Quite simple. You have elections, but whoever is in power always wins. So the incumbent always wins. And Viktor Orban actually has won 5 consecutive elections since 2010. How did he do it? 3 steps. So you take all independent regulators, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Anti-Monopoly Committee, the various other telecom regulator and so on, and you subjugate it to the executive. So the executive controls all regulators. Number 2, related to my earlier story, you control the courts. he did it in a different way than what Mexico is trying to do. He just replaced all the judges and put his friends as judges. And they're still judges today. And number three, he muzzled the media. He basically created a lot of state-owned media. And whichever journalists were not agreeing with his policies, he basically sent the police and the prosecutor's office against them. And he calls this illiberal democracy. Now, why am I telling you this story of Hungary, a country that probably most of you have not visited? Well, because it has striking resemblance to what's developing in Mexico. Why do I say this? If the image that I gave the organizers can come out, please. I see it on my screen. This is the image. So this is data that I thought of this morning and I hastily put together. This is the last 150 years of any one country. So we have a data set for the last 150 years that shows the rise of liberal democracy, in various countries around the world. So if you look at this in the case of Mexico, you see that, like most countries in the world, it did not start as a very democratic society. Then around the late 1990s, early 2000s, democracy goes up. I should say, by the way, that this index is created by scholars in Sweden and is the most widely recognized index of democracy in the world. So democracy in Mexico starts going up. In the late 1990s, early 2000s, by and large stays there. And look at the huge drop in the last few years. In the last 3 to 4 years, basically nosedives. Why am I showing you this graph? Because it looks exactly like a case of moving towards an illiberal democracy. What is that again? Whoever is in power wants to control all the power, all parts of, all branches of government, executive, legislative, and now the judicial. Hence, the election of judges by popular vote. So why am I personally telling you all of this? I'm actually an economist. I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I do not follow legal developments much. But I'm an economist at the London School of Economics. Together with some of my co-authors at Harvard, we have been doing a large project, global cross-country project. Here is how we have this data that looks at how business reform happens. Since we're economists, we want more growth, more economic development around the world. And we're asking a simple question. In which countries do you see reforms, changes in regulation that help businesses develop? Through trade, through getting more access to credit, through paying less taxes, or at least simplifying the tax regime, and so on. So we have enormous data for many, many years for every country in the world that looks at this phenomenon. And then we connect it to politics, to democracy, or the absence of democracy. Now, in economic theory, a lot of theorists basically say democracy is messy, democracy is noisy, you have too many actors in it. So it's actually not well correlated with economic growth. They point to China and see no democracy in China, high growth. No democracy in Korea early on, high growth. So there are a lot of theories that say democracy is actually bad for growth. You want some level of autocracy, or if you like it, of illiberal democracy, of the Hungarian, perhaps Mexico type, in order to grow. Our analysis, our research shows exactly the opposite. Surprisingly strong results, which basically show that the more democratic a society is, the more there is opportunity both in the political sphere to represent growth interest, development interest, and the more there is lobbying for reform. So as a result, democratic countries both try to reform more and actually succeed in reforming more. So one is you try, but for some reason you fail. A government changes, a minister moves on, the parliament does not approve it, or you succeed. So both you try more in a democracy and you succeed more. In contrast, in autocracies, like Bolivia under Evo Morales, like Hungary under Viktor Orban, and maybe like Mexico now, if you look at this graph, both your desire to reform business regulation is less, and the success of that is less. Why? I would finish with a few thoughts. Well, why you try less? That's a bit clear, because if you control all branches of government, you have business friends, they come to you and say, Mr. President or Miss President, I would like to do this and that, and they just say, I'll call my friends because I control the whole of public institutions, they'll do it for you. You don't really need to change regulation. You just point people to the right parts of government. So that's fairly clear. You don't need to attempt much. But why do you fail more? That's a real surprise in the data, because if you have absolute control over all of public institutions and you say, we're going to do this, it should be done, right? Because you control the courts, you control the parliament or the legislature, you control the executive. In our research, we only have some hypotheses supported by data, but we find this phenomenon that some of the previous speakers have spoken to. Well, to reform, you need to actually know how to do it. You need to have, if you like, the appetite, but also the knowledge how to do it. And it turns out that in liberal democracies, all the reformers, all the previous reformers have been shunned, have been put away, if you like, some of them imprisoned in the bad cases, some of them just away from public life. So even if you wanted to reform, you just don't know how. So you end up with this very surprising situation where if you control everything, you actually don't know how to do things when you want them to do. Now, I'll finish with just a couple more thoughts. It sounds for a Saturday morning talk, this is fairly pessimistic, so I thought, how do I finish in a very optimistic note? I did not come up with a very optimistic note, but a somewhat optimistic note, and I'll go back to the Bolivian case. Bolivia, of course, is a much smaller country, so you could say that things in Bolivia develop much faster, both in the wrong direction and then in the right direction. But just in a span of less than 15 years, they did the type of reform that you are now starting to implement, and they basically saw that it's a failure. Now they're starting to reverse it. So maybe tomorrow, Sunday, I'm sure many of you are thinking of this is a terrible vote, bad things are going to happen, but maybe this is the beginning of the end. This is what happened in Bolivia. Once people realized where this is leading, there was a lot more discontent than previously, and not just by people who care about the courts, because if we say who cares among us about the courts, not that many people per se. Again, I'm an economist, so I care about economic growth and business regulation. But if I see that this subjugation of the courts, the capture of the court system, is one step towards complete dominance of public institutions, and if you believe me that this dominance is actually related to less business reform, both trying to reform and both achieving actual reform, then everybody who cares about the economy, about jobs, about investment, which is pretty much everybody in any society, should care about tomorrow's vote. Now, I'm a foreigner, I cannot tell you how to vote, but think of it as an opportunity, maybe not immediately, maybe in some time, to change the way that the country is going. And I'll finish with just a final look at this image, if we can show it again, please, of how much, in terms of democratic institutions, Mexico has fallen over the last 4 years. Hopefully this can be reversed, so when you please invite me in a few years, this will be turned around the other way. Thank you. Thank you, Puebla.